I've got a product update for AUD. We generally do this kind of product update every year at the PUG. It's just a summary of all the development that's been done on the product in the last year and since the last PUG. So first, we're just going to review, what releases have come out generally in the last year and since the last PUG. So the last time was held in September of 2020. We're staying on a yearly or bi-yearly release cycle. The 8.3 release has had a lot of stuff put into it, and so we've really been on more of a yearly release cycle this last year, but likely to move back into a bi-yearly cycle in terms of the major releases. But we still are putting out monthly updates, roughly. So any small enhancements and issues that come up are generally addressed within about a month or so time frame. That's still allowing us to respond to things. On the bi-yearly cycle, it's usually around Q1 and Q3. So this year we're looking a little later into the fall for the major release, but again, I think we're going to get into more of a bi-yearly cadence as into the future. And of course, we're always focused on maintaining compatibility so that the new updates can always be installed and with minimal disruption to existing configurations. In a lot of cases, there's really no need to adjust perhaps some minor issues, but we generally are keeping things very compatible. So to look back to the version 7 releases, this hasn't changed. The latest updates haven't changed. We haven't released any new updates for the version 7 products that were, let's see, I believe around through about the 2018 timeframe. So since AUD 8.0, the AUD 8.0 and 8.1, they've remained also pretty stable with their latest updates. They're released in 2019 and 2020. And then with the AUD 8.2 release, which came out last year, we're currently at the 8.2.8 update release for that. There have been quite a few significant enhancements to 8.2 over that time frame, as we've also been working on the upcoming release, which is AUD 8.3, which we have a lot of folks, as Dennis mentioned, working with the earlier versions of this. We're going to have a full public release of this in the fall. But we currently have very stable builds of this release being used for ongoing projects. So to kind of summarize what's been done over the last year in terms of both the 8.2 updates and the 8.3 release, we've got roughly 57 product enhancements, resolved about 106 issues that came up with some of the new functionality, some of the legacy functionality. We're starting to get into some pretty advanced implementations. Sometimes that leads to some issues. We're taking care of them all. 8.2, 85 resolved issues and still 22 enhancements. And this is not the release, just the updates to it since last year's main release. So, even though it's not the next major release of the product, we still managed to fold about 22 enhancements into it. And the upcoming release, and this is to date, as we march on into a little later into the fall, we'll probably have a little bit more going into this release as well. But right now it stands at about 35 major enhancements. Some of those are pretty significant and really consist of a lot of various updates to the product, which you'll see later in this presentation. And of course, we resolved some additional issues for that main release as well. So I do want to point out that there are 2 completely new major features in the 8.3 release. And that's a bit atypical, and also kind of explain why the release cycle has been pushed out a little bit. We have some major new functionality, some of which is specific to substation design, but also a completely new type of clearance checking functionality. So to provide a general overview of what's in those releases, want to be clear, they both support map 2017 all the way through the latest 2022 release of map 3D in AutoCAD. They're both still backward compatible with pre 8.2 configurations. For the 8.2 release, the focus has generally been on a lot of enhancements to underground conduit modeling, and some of that's to better support the ESRI utility network modeling. The 8.3 release for this fall has more of a focus on 3D modeling and the corresponding capabilities for layout and editing in a 3D design case. There's also the more advanced analysis, substation support, and then a lot of really good new rule capabilities that apply to all of this. Dennis mentioned some of this. So some of these enhancements are really starting to open up possible, solutions and things that I don't even believe have been worked out yet. And I'm personally very curious to see how this is going to, the feedback we're going to get and the kinds of scenarios that we could start addressing with this. So to get into a little bit more of detail on the 8.2 updates, in terms of the design workflow and efficiency area, we have a lot of enhancement to the ribbon, the AutoCAD ribbon, that'll aid in allowing configurations to be better packaged up, avoid the need to roll out as many changes to the AutoCAD configuration, and streamline how the workflow with the ribbon operates. So we're really starting to see a lot of streamlining there to make that much simpler to use and leverage and work with the sets of models and CUs and things that need to be placed. Along with that are improvements to the information tools and managing data. Some specific tools for overhead wire and framing that make editing in certain cases much simpler that really weren't well addressed before. And then, some changes that are kind of day-to-day things, but they're very important for when you're needing to annotate and lay out things, place work locations, automatically place work locations, handle AutoCAD annotative capabilities. So these are all, the kind of bread and butter operations that we just want to continue streamlining and addressing. So in terms of more detailed design capabilities, we have in the 8.2 updates support for modeling multi-phase conduit banks. So this is pretty interesting and also relates to how things might get modeled in the GIS system. So we're better supporting the ability to both model the conduits physically while still retaining the 3-phase conductor tracking of those conductors that might be in separate conduits. Improving how sag load cases can be displayed for profiling. Some enhancements to sort of address some issues that have been brought up in the past about combining pulling tension results together. So we still don't have a full comprehensive solution that's streamlined, but this will allow much simpler workarounds for chaining together pulling tension results. And this has become more of a common request for that. And also better support for modeling with vertical sweeps and conduit, whether or not the structures have ports, and handling a lot more underground design scenarios for that. So in terms of implementation and support, the enhancements to the rule system and the geometry functions that have been introduced, and as well as list and dictionary, the capabilities are really opening up for doing more advanced things with the rule system. Also provided more access to AutoCAD values and some support for X data, and allowing kind of an interop with some of those perhaps legacy systems or other scenarios where it's unavoidable to interoperate with some of those AutoCAD systems. So for the 8.3 release, in terms of design, workflow, and efficiency, again, we have some new ribbon functionality. For the new release, we've improved the coverage of icons and out of the box configuration to make some of the newer capabilities that were always possible to configure, but make those more easily accessible through the out of the box configuration for those. A really important capability in 8.3 are some enhancements that allow using some of the replacement functionality to actually perform copying. We don't fully have full copy paste support yet. We're looking into that for the future, but these enhancements will allow you to start copying whole sets of objects with all of the relationships, with connections and containment maintained. And really out of all the different things you may see, that this may turn out to be, for a lot of folks, one of the more important enhancements in this release. Also, an interesting new capability, we're starting to enable certain operations to be done in external drawings. So this relates to scenarios where you might have separate drawings from the main AUD drawing, perhaps for plot layouts or other purposes, but you may need to access the information that's in that AUD drawing for call outs or generating tables. So we're enabling some of that functionality so that some of those subsidiary drawings and plot layouts can actually be defined in completely separate drawing files. This is an interesting new capability, and another area I'm really curious to get feedback on from a lot of folks. So this brings us to the next part of the 8.3 release, which is a heavy focus on the 3D functionality, right? So it's a bit of a coincidence that's the 8.3 release, but it's also got a lot of 3D functionality in it. So in terms of detailed design, we have the completely new 3D clearance checking functionality. We have new capabilities for doing direct 3D layouts. So you could do a bit of layout in 3D, but there were certain limitations, especially around line editing and line digitizing. So a lot of that's been improved so that you can do more and more direct layout in a 3D environment. We've enabled support for gas and water fittings that previously didn't have the kind of full support for 3D orientation, positioning, as well as enhancing the elevation assignment tool. Previously, it was pretty simplified in terms of assigning elevation, and now we have a lot more options, configurable settings for it. Basically, just make that a lot more robust tool for assigning and managing elevations and surface information. So again, that 3D clearance checking, that's a completely new set of functionality, not really just an enhancement to existing stuff, but a whole new function. So in terms of implementation and support, a very important enhancement in the 8.3 release is a complete revamp of the 3D part editor. Now this is something that you would have seen when configuring all of your predefined models and CUs in the product. And so this 3D part editor enhancement drastically simplifies the authoring of port metadata and other aspects of authoring the 3D part. There's also a lot of improvement to simply managing them, importing them, and working with those 3D parts. Also, there's a capability to handle dynamic 3D parts. This allows creating, more of a generalized 3D block, but that can be runtime modified for, say, different heights or widths or sizes that would otherwise have required creating, predefining all of those different sizes. So this is a pretty powerful capability that could, potentially drastically simplify scenarios where you need, kind of a range of part sizes or need just completely custom sizes for design scenarios. There are some additional display options for 2D and 3D, including the ability to show more of a 2D display style, but using 3D geometry. Some enhancements to the validation system that allow those, the newer custom validation definitions to be displayed more easily and managed. Again, more rule geometry function for managing, 3D geometry through rules. And then some improvements to how the rule logging is done to make it easier to work with and author those rules. So finally, we have a set of support for substation design, including a completely new function for lightning protection. Similar to the clearance checking, it's a completely new capability, as well as a corresponding set of modeling. And this brings the substation modeling up to the point where we have pretty good coverage across the entire set of equipment needed to design a substation, including fence modeling, complete sets of conductor and equipment modeling, support for things like splines and multiple connection, cables and things. There's a lot of really great functionality coming in that. Support for the planning and control AutoCAD electrical tool, and separate installers and branded and licensed versions for use with substation. So I'm now going to go into a little bit more detail on some of these specific major new features. So the first one I want to look at is the clearance checking functionality. So this provides a few different things and can support a broad range of types of objects. It's based on finding the closest distance between two 3D objects, and those 3D objects can be, the 3D representation of AUD features, or they can be just any arbitrary 3D solid object or block. For comparison to, say, things that may not be modeled in AUD but are used through reference. So this allows a pretty generalized capability for checking these clearances, and it's also configurable so that you can predefine certain types of checks and also rules to drive dynamically what those required distances are between all the various objects. It also introduces a capability where you can tag sub pieces of the geometry. So if you have 3D blocks, and those 3D blocks really are kind of large assemblies or large pieces of equipment with various components that need different checking on different parts of those components, those subcomponents can be tagged so that only those subcomponents are checked in terms of the clearance. So when it runs these clearance checks, it will display the results in a new result palette. And this allows for browsing through the results, highlighting, showing the closest distance line that's found between them, and also information that can be customized for display. So instead of just showing the standard identifier, this can also be customized to show specific information relevant to that clearance check. It will display both the horizontal and vertical components of that closest distance portion. Now, to be clear, that's not quite exactly the same as a true profile-based horizontal and or vertical check, but this will allow finding, in a lot of cases, the separate horizontal or vertical distance between those objects. Here you can see for this selected entry, it's highlighted and showing the closest distance line there. And finally, there's a few new commands as well as an enhancement to the existing clearance command. The existing clearance command supports more line types now for creating explicit envelopes for that type of analysis. But the new clearance distance checking functionality has a set of new commands that will display the result palette, run the command directly, or for tagging and authoring that subgeometry. So another new analysis capability is the lightning protection analysis. And this is a bit specific to substation design. There's a new command, and it performs a rolling sphere visualization and an AutoCAD solid generation based on selected masts and shield wires. So here you can see a little bit more of a complex example with multiple masts generating the lightning protection solid area. So this is a pretty simple to use command, and we'll just generate the required area based on the specified strike radius and selected objects. And of course, it'll also support using AUD select for automation. So you know, automatically selecting certain types to identify the mass and or shield wires. So the part editor is now available as its own command and button from the ribbon. Previously, this was only accessible when authoring models from the industry model config. And making it available as its own tool both makes it more easily accessible without having to go into the industry model config, but it also opens up the possibility of using it for editing of the actual drawings. So you can see here that this framing is pulled up in the part editor, but it will also allow the actual underlying block to be opened in AutoCAD. And then that opens up all kinds of new capabilities that can be done for assisting in the authoring of this 3D part content. So including authoring of ports, setting orientation, and the clearance checking and other you know, dynamic block tagging capabilities are also provided in this environment. So here you can see there's also direct editing of the port metadata. So this just really dramatically improves the ease with which this kind of information can be authored. Previously, it would have to be done separately, completely in AutoCAD and using the AutoCAD commands to edit the port blocks, and this makes the process much simpler. There are also some new options for managing all of them, including a ability to add multiple parts from a single block with nested subcomponents, and a refresh option that will analyze the current directory of blocks and provide those as available for import as well. So this is a pretty significant update to the functionality, and we even have some projects where, you know, these new tools are so much easier to use that we can use those for authoring content, even for use in an 8.2 environment, simply because these new tools make it that much easier to author the same part definitions. So there's also a new command for purging selected objects, and this can be extremely useful for scenarios when the 3D part content is kind of in flux and being worked out. You may have, you know, in progress drawings or test drawings, and you know, the purge function still can be used for purging all the blocks out, but the purge selected function makes it much easier to go into an existing drawing and simply select the instances of those in your design drawing to have them reloaded from the latest part definition. So all of these capabilities will make it much simpler to, you know, perform this authoring, where you have multiple users authoring the part content. You have, you know, a library of parts being updated, and a need to roll those changes out and update in progress and test drawings with that content as configurations are updated and worked out. Finally, the part definition will now always be updated whenever the block's loaded. So even if the drawing file that drives that part has been updated, this will ensure that it's always loading the latest version of that at runtime. So overall, this is going to make the 3D block part handling much more robust and much easier and streamlined to author and configure. So for setting elevations, previously we had a elevation tool, and it performed the task necessary to assign z values and elevations to things, but it was pretty limited in some of the other scenarios it could handle. So the changes to this elevation tool are that it now provides several new options for providing additional offsets, providing a minimum elevation, or even if you don't have a surface available, you can set an elevation perhaps in the expectation that you're going to later get a civil surface provided, and you can go ahead and set up your design to lay everything out at a certain elevation. There are options to automatically set the UCS to that elevation so that as you lay things out, they get placed at that Z value. And then there are also options to maintain prior offsets to other surfaces. So if you have one surface that came in and everything got designed to that surface, and then perhaps you get an updated surface, you can use these tools to ensure that the delta, the change between those, or the offset objects had to the prior surface are maintained. So a lot more capability around this and flexibility. It's also more clearly set up to store these settings for digitizing and placement, separate from actually just assigning elevations. So this tool can now be used to just kind of set up all these settings for regular workflow design cases, but also for just explicitly applying elevations to selected objects. So there have been a lot of 3D modeling enhancements. Really so many, it's hard to summarize them well. But probably the most relevant for most current users of the product is the ability to edit and work with 3D line geometry directly. So in this example on the side here, you can see I've got a underground line with a segment, and that vertex is being edited, and it's being edited using the AutoCAD gizmos. And the product generally disabled those gizmos to avoid conflicting with the other custom snaps in the product. But in certain cases, the AutoCAD gizmos provide a very streamlined, simple way to work with 3D geometry. Previously, they weren't very usable because even if you edited it in 3D with these, the system didn't really support direct 3D editing. But now with direct 3D editing supported, these tools provide a much simpler way to do things like change the Z elevation, of a segment ground reference line. So what this is illustrating over here is that by moving that vertex, this can now be used to just directly change the 3D geometry. Now, this kind of operation previously had to be done in the transition point editor or other tools for editing 3D line geometry. And there are still reasons to use the transition point editor, as it provides, projected length and things like that. But in some cases, this provides a much simpler and more intuitive way to work with 3D line geometry. In addition to that, there's also a new snapping mode that works alongside of the AutoCAD snapping modes that will override and ensure that the snap is done to an actual AUD port definition. So if needing to work in 3D and ensure ports are snapped, this snap mode makes that much simpler. There is a copy paste enabling for 3D objects. The copy paste functionality is still very limited in terms of just copying the objects and not the relationships. I see that as something important for future, but previously you couldn't even copy and paste the 3D objects directly. But that is now supported. So you can copy and paste the 3D objects, although it's still not supported for relationships. That said, the replace command is now enabled to support those relationships as needed for now. So between those two those two supporting features, you can do basic copy and paste in 3D, or you can use the replace command to copy with full relationships and connectivity. There are a lot of updates to the digitizing commands, so that when initially laying things out, they'll work much better in a direct 3D environment. And as well as the line section editor. So in cases where you do want to lay out, say, a conduit in terms of specific, straight runs and bends, there have been some fixes and improvements to the line section editor as well. So for modeling, the new dynamic 3D part capability is, again, something that in scenarios where it's needed, it can dramatically reduce the number of different predefined model sizes that are needed. And the way that system works is that as different sizes are specified for a particular feature, so you could place some type of supporting structure or some other type of structure that has a specific size, set its height, width, or other values. And then as those specific dimension values are specified for that, the system will go and take that dynamic block and sort of generate a specific sized block for that. So what you end up with is not really an AutoCAD dynamic block, but a static block, but that is sized to that particular size. And the system has some robust support for ensuring that that is updated and managed. And so, and as well as any port definitions that might be contained within that. So, this is something that I don't think has been investigated as much in the distribution space, but there may be a lot of distribution scenarios where this could become very useful, particularly around possible custom vault modeling and scenarios where you have custom sizes, but that also need things like port locations specified as well. Some of the other scenarios relate more specifically to very detailed 3D modeling where you're nesting objects on each other. This generally comes up a lot in the substation design scenarios, although this could be used for distribution cases where you're wanting to do some very detailed modeling, say inside of a vault, or do a really detailed overhead framing modeling. And then finally, in the substation data model extension, there's support for direct conductor cables with bends, splines, direct catenary support without using wires, and then support for having multi-cable spacers, and of course the fence modeling, which is based on enhancements to the segment feature class. So in addition to those improvements to the workflows, there are also display options allowing block attributes to be updated on 3D blocks if necessary. Some of that is specifically done for AutoCAD electrical integration, which is based on AutoCAD block attributes for the most part. Also a ability to manage what layers the 3D objects are placed on, and new display styles where you can display, say, 3D geometry, but display with a kind of a 2D line style. The changes to the ribbon, I think, are probably the broadest, most useful new capabilities, and really, I don't want to say a game changer, but that will make managing the ribbon much simpler by adopting these new controls. So the new ribbon controls were introduced last year, but the further capabilities are really fleshing them out so they can truly be used as a replacement for defining a lot of custom items in the AutoCAD ribbon. And so what that does is it means that you can basically then use the out-of-the-box AUD ribbon controls, but still have all of the most relevant picks loaded and set up dynamically based on your configuration and your template. So just imagine all these panels listing out, all of your facilities and picks organized the way that you want, and then that's all loaded just with your template. So you don't have to worry about potentially rolling out a CUI file and things like that if you can follow the rest of the out-of-the-box layout on the ribbon. So we have some folks using that, and it does make the deployment management much simpler by not having to manage a separate set of CUI changes. It better consolidates all this information in your template, and provides you with the ability to lay everything out. It's also working in the model selection much more tightly, so that it flows simpler in terms of selecting what models you want. There are new options to execute the digitizing command. So simply by picking, say, a pole from the drop down, it can immediately jump into placing that pole in the drawing or other devices and types, keeping you from having to go through a two-step process of picking out the model that you want and then placing it through another command. In addition to that, the placement and digitizing commands themselves have got new options, sets of snapping options, so you can predefine what types of AutoCAD and or the new port snap modes that you want enabled when you're placing specific picks. So for example, you can use one set of snaps for laying out a line, another set of snaps for placing this other type of equipment, and then a lot of other options around how these drop downs display and help organize your placement and picks. So one minor enhancement that really can improve usage of the 3D content is there is now an option to display any corresponding 3D model thumbnails in the dropdown. So this allows you to really get a good visual of all your models. A lot of the time, it may not be clear from the naming standards and long descriptions. So if you maintain a nice set of preview images along with your 3D content, now that can be just displayed out right where the designer can see it and really know visually what they're selecting. Another minor improvement is the indication of units for unit-based attributes when placed in the ribbon. So now if you have different units, they might be in inches or feet or millimeters and meters, then it's going to be really clear in the ribbon what units are being specified for that. So this is really a new kind of capability in the product that's never really been supported before, but is the idea of taking an AUD drawing and including it in a separate external non-AUD drawing as an external reference. So a scenario for that might be where you want you don't want to have to define all of your plot layouts and annotated drawings in the main AUD drawing, but you still want to be able to pull identifying information, CUs, and other information from the main AUD drawing. So here you can see I've got an example where I've got an external drawing that's referencing an actual AUD drawing, and I've created a plot layout and placed that in the plot layout. I've used some clipping to just clip out certain parts of it, but then I've still been able to go in there and select these individual pieces and place callouts for them in this external drawing. So at this point, it's fairly limited into the capabilities that can be used for this type of scenario. It's right now it's limited to the callout command for placing callouts and the AUD table command for placing tables. But those functions can now be used in an external drawing and placing these annotations for this kind of scenario. There's a new command for for selecting and support for multi-select. So when you're externally referencing the AUD drawing, there's not really a way to use normal AutoCAD selection mechanisms, but by using the AUD selection mechanisms, which can be based on feature classes and certain types of features, this allows you to potentially perform a multi-call out insert based on these. So say you could pull in the AUD drawing, and perhaps you just want to annotate conductors, or you just want to annotate certain types of objects. This can now be done using this separate call out function using AUD select options, which can be based on tracing or feature class matching, or even complex SQL queries. All right, so there are just a few other somewhat significant changes included in the 8.3 release. There are some improvements to the AUD table functionality that open up, a lot more complex types of table results and reporting using SQL queries. Better support for showing custom validation categories, so you can create sort of your own validation categories and have those organized better in the validation results. So you can place all of a certain type of validation in its own name section, and better group all those together, so you can easily review just those types of validations. Along with that are more options for controlling what's shown in the analysis enabling settings, and the sets of objects that are automatically validated and analyzed. New options for logging the rule output to the command line. So we previously allowed better logging capabilities, but now this can be turned on and just more easily accessed and viewed as you're working through and testing rule changes. There's now a named user licensing capability available, and the AUD About box has been revamped and providing these new licensing options. So this new licensing system is it better follows the Autodesk licensing approach based on a named user account, and can really simplify how the licensing can be set up for users if taking that approach. You can still use all the other licensing types, and they'll also be made available. But just pointing out, this new named user licensing is now available in these latest 8.2 and 8.3 releases. There are other updates to the substation data model extension, but I want to point out that none of the other data models have been changed, so there are no data model updates aside from drawings that might be using the substation extension. So this brings me to demoing some of this new functionality. I don't have a lot of in-depth demos for a lot of this stuff, but I can show some quick examples, kind of make some of this a little bit more tangible. So I'm going to switch over to my development environment drawing here. So here you can see I've got a kind of a simple example. It has a civil surface added to it, and some overhead distribution, as well as some underground conduit running out. It's all following the surface. You can see off to the side here, it's been assigned an elevation with a minimum elevation. So if something happens to fall off of this surface, at least it's in the general elevation vicinity. Previously, some of this stuff might fall off to zero elevation and create some problems. Now this is going to behave a lot better in those types of scenarios. On the ribbon, you can see this is a variation of the out-of-the-box configuration that's been set up to provide a ribbon layout a bit like the prior out-of-the-box. The new ribbon for the product still includes panels, so I'm going to right-click and go over here to show panels. They're provided as a classic panel, so I can still select electric underground, and this is the prior panel that is completely based on AutoCAD CUI layout. So here you can see I've got drop downs for digitizing, but using the using the default selection. So this kind of shows the prior way of doing things, where you would select the models that you want, and then you would actually do the digitizing picks from here. Well, the new controls, so I'm going to turn that panel back off. In the new controls, when I select primary, you'll see I get a drop down with just the options for what I'm going to digitize. And then I still have the ability to define what are equivalent to menu picks, but instead of having to define this in the AutoCAD ribbon definition, this can all be part of the template and created so that all of the digitizing can be done together here. For things like other structures, you can see that you can just immediately digitize of this. So I don't necessarily need to have a pick to place a pad. Oh, here's where I can specify the pad I want. You can see here it's showing a preview of the 3D image, and I can select to just place that pad directly off that ribbon pick. If I select a different model, I'm going to select this this different model of pad. If I just click to select that model, the option is set to just immediately digitize it. So instead of having to select the model and then select another digitizing button, I can just go up here and I can find the piece I want, and I can click it, and it'll immediately move into the placement. So that's just a small sampling of the types of ribbon enhancements that have gone in. For the external reference checking, I'm going to open up this external drawing I've already created. So this drawing was created just from a regular AutoCAD template. This is not an AUD drawing, although I've referenced in the other drawing. So I'm going to I don't want to compare it, so I'm going to close out of that. And here you can see I've created. If I'll switch to model space to show that I have an XREF of this original drawing you just saw, XREF'd into this drawing. I've used the XClip command to just clip out this portion of it, and then added a view of that to this plot layout. So I'm now going to run the callout command, and you can see it switches to this viewport as it would in a regular AUD drawing. And I'm going to pick on this framing, and I'm going to choose this general callout definition. Now, in this particular configuration, the scaling's a bit off, so I'm going to set the scale to a more appropriate scale. And I'm going to go place this, specify the leader option. Put an arrow location out, and see the the information populating the callout is still coming from the AUD drawing that's referenced here. So if I go look at the original AUD drawing, we're placing a callout for this this top framing, and that's coming from this drawing and from this AUD drawing, but allowing the callout to be placed in this external drawing. All right, so I don't have a very elaborate example of the clearance checking setup in this particular environment, but I'm going to run the AUD clearance results command to show the clearance panel. So down here you can see the clearance result panel, which also has buttons for running particular clearance checks. I don't have a rule check configured on this drawing, but I'm going to use the closest distance check, which just simply allows you to select multiple objects. So I'm going to choose closest distance, and in this case, this is a bit contrived, but I'm going to select this this pole head or framing over there, and then this transformer over on this side. Here you can see it's found the closest distance between those. If I select this, they highlight, and it also generates a line indicating where that closest point is located for that distance. I'm going to click the button to clear the results from that and close that panel. The rule check option there, though, is configurable with predefined checks, and then also rules can be configured to drive required distances between based on the types of objects. So say if we needed to verify that this transformer has a certain distance to these other objects, those could be configured. So the elevation setting, AUD elevation set command, and here you can see it's displaying for the civil surface that's available, but I've also have a default elevation set that's set to be the minimum surface, and here you can see that's at a 416. That's what that minimum surface is set to. I can also specify an additional offset, meaning if I want everything placed a certain offset to the surface, that can be specified. I can indicate whether or not I want that offset to just, maybe I just want to apply that offset explicitly by setting, or maybe I want that always applied every single time I place anything in the drawing. For maintaining prior offsets, if you maintain prior elevations, you can specify different surfaces to use for prior elevations. And then finally, you can have the UCS changed to mirror the default elevation. So that could bring the UCS default elevation up to that. So getting close to the end of time here, I'm going to quickly just show an example of the part editor, and then hopefully have a couple minutes for Q&A. I'm going to go to the configuration tab and bring up that part editor. So I'm going to search for, see. So this particular framing here, let's double click it and bring it up. Perhaps, there we go. Yeah, this is quite a this is quite an extensive example here. So you can see that it's showing a preview as it did before, an interactive preview. This can be used to save, adjust and save preview image that can be used for those digitizing commands we saw earlier, saving the thumbnail image. But the big change here is that we can open the corresponding drawing, and even just as a matter of managing and browsing and finding these drawings, this is potentially very useful, where just by bringing this up, it allows me to find this, pull up the corresponding block drawing in AutoCAD. But the bigger advantage here is that it also allows editing of the port metadata and other aspects of this model, while still having this drawing open in AutoCAD here. So I can select these ports, and as I select a port, I can choose to, set the positions of the ports by certain criteria. This provides placement tools, so this makes it much easier to position and orient the ports and define them. There are automatic naming options that will allow the ports to be named automatically. Their types can be specified through a drop-down. So again, if you're already familiar with the process for authoring this, this dramatically improves the ease in which you can author that kind of content. So sorry for going through that so quickly. I want to leave a few minutes for Q&A here. So well, actually, I need to cover what's next with the product quickly. We expect there to be more 8.2 updates, mostly around the multi-phase conduit bank functionality. The 8.3 release will be coming out. Of course, we've kind of gone over all the major new features in that 8.3 release. The 8.4 would be the next major release, and its final scope and release timeframe are kind of to be determined right now. I'm not sure if this will be, probably into the 2022 timeframe, but really that is yet to be determined. Future items are probably going to be copy paste support will be improved, more improvements to the call out and possibly those XRF scenarios, the AUD workflow capabilities and rule capabilities surrounding that. And then finally, you know, based on the feedback we get from the PUG here, you know, if we get some more of your requests and things based on your feedback. So, you know, related to those workflow rules, I do want to have time for Q&A, but I also have an example for the workflow rules I wanted to illustrate really quickly because that's been discussed, and I just want to show a quick example. This is something I just threw together fairly quickly in terms of just an example of the geometry support that was never possible before. So I'm going to run the AUD workflow command, and I'm going to choose this service workflow that I created this morning. It's going to prompt for polls. I'm going to select just across the entire drawing. It's just going to process whatever polls it finds, and what it's going to do is it's going to automatically place in services for those polls. So here it's calculated where to place these services and everything else. So that's just a real quick example that I just threw together in terms of showing how you know, geometry for lines and that kind of capability can provide something you know, can be turned into some powerful functionality based on workflows and certain operations that can be automated. So that's the type of capability that we just didn't really have before. I have one other example here, and that's a case where I've got a gas pipe and this segment example I've run across here. So I'm going to run this workflow command, and I've got this intersection workflow. I'm going to prompt and select this segment. And so after selecting that segment, it's going to go and find detect the intersection. Now, previously, we could detect intersections, you know, and throw a validation error, but now it's you know, it's going to be possible for the system to process the geometry and rules. So in this example, I just set up where it inserted some offset points and offset them down. So in this case, it detected the intersection and then it put in some automatic transition points for that. All right, so sorry for running all the way to the end of time here, but if we have any questions.
This is from Dan Layton. It says, I gather the automatic ribbon function is to some extent driven from the default profile setup. Does it respond to additional line types? So for example, if you configured it for default service and default feeder lines, will additional ribbon icons appear?
Oh, so in terms of the top level items that you see on the ribbon, that's there's a new category that can be specified that drives that. And you can create new custom line types. You can create new named line types and use that to sort of organize things. There's also something some folks have used to kind of merge some sections together. Again, that's perhaps more for a separate configuration discussion, but yeah, some of those capabilities have been set up so that you can better divide those up and create you know, custom top level buttons and drop downs.